Cosgrove, years ago, probably 16, 17 years ago, came back from a trip to Iran after a summer where he was photographing and collecting images for the Aga Khan collection at MIT, and I asked if I could see what he had been doing, look at the images of architecture and design that he had collected. And Professor Bilbasi mentioned earlier these sort of ignorant, untrained kind of people, when looking at this Islamic art, don't really understand it, but only can say, it's really beautiful. I was one of those people, and I remain one of those people. Dr. Criswell, who has apparently his problems, was one of my heroes, because he is one of those European kind of people with at least an appreciation of that there's something there to look at. And I think he cracked open the door that has yet to be fully opened to understand the deep relationship between the Middle East and Europe. So I wanted to look at some of the things that I've been looking at and share them with you. Embellishment. This was the real title of this. Dr. Buzzardi left it out of the title, probably because it wouldn't fit in his format. European adoption and adaptation of Middle Eastern design elements. I'd like to start with this image. And this in French is the Coupe de Cosgrove, and it's Sassanian, so it's from Iran, pre-Islamic, 531-ish. And it was called King Solomon's Cup originally, when it was acquired by the Abbot Suger at Saint-Denis in Paris, which many of you will recall. Abbot Suger added the ambulatory to the abbey, which is considered the first Gothic structure in Europe. First use of true Gothic kind of stuff. It's really interesting to me that the abbot in Paris acquired this piece, probably didn't understand it, like me, but also recognized that it was very beautiful. I wanted to have it as part of the treasury of this Christian center. You'll notice the circular shape of it. Muhammad stopped his presentation with this circle between the two columns. So here's a circle, this emphasis on geometry that we see so typical of the Middle East. And the central figure here is the king, Khosrow. And he's sitting here with a crown on and a sword, and he's sitting on a throne. We're going to see this image later in Europe when there are images of kings in Europe. They'll be sitting on the throne with a sword between their legs and a crown on their head. And it's kind of interesting when we think of Western civilization as based on Greco-Roman culture. The crown on the head was not a Greco-Roman thing at all. Sitting on the throne with a sword, we never see Caesars in that particular pose, but here we see this Middle Eastern potentate with that, and that is adopted as a way to express kingship in Europe later on. So here we see this interesting plate. Here we see a similar round geometry surrounded by circles, with more circles, and a central piece. Sadly, we're looking at the exterior of this church. It's Lodi near Milan. So here we are in the 12th century with what will later, of course, be called a rose window. But this round window can be Romanesque wheel configuration. So some of the earlier round windows had this wheel thing. This church, of course, is based on the Roman basilica plan. And it's, we call it Romanesque in design. But of course, Romanesque means like the Romans did it. So it's a basilica like the Romans did, but the Romans didn't do this. Okay? It's not a Roman thing at all. And we look at the coupe de Khosrow, the cup of King Solomon. Maybe that's really the basis of this window, this object, oddly enough, that was in Europe for hundreds of years before this, and there probably were other ones like it. One wonders whether this round window was placed in this church to distinguish it from Roman buildings, from pagan Roman culture, from polytheistic Greco-Roman culture, and rather to indicate it, no, this church, and behind the high altar in this instance, the round window suggests a monotheistic religion, which of course is an innovation of the Middle East, not of the Greco-Roman world. So interesting thing. We'll look at some more of these. Here's another one. This one very much like the coupe de Khosrow, because we see the same circle surrounded by circles with circles and circles, and the central element. And the king in the center here is Christ. Christ the King. King of Kings. Shana Shana. Very interesting. So this one I think we can put the coupe de Khosrow, superimpose it onto it. This is Shah. We see that Islamic thing. Once again, in France, where the Sassanian place was all along here. Khosrow related, I think, talk about points of origin. Ooh, another circular object here. This one from Egypt. 13th century, too later than that. And here we see this circular element. And we have all the circles and a central circle here. But here we've got this border being used of calligraphy. And it's being used as a decorative element. And I appreciate that you were all warmed up to this calligraphic script by Professor Gilbesi. And here we see Professor Gilbesi already talked about Spain. So here we see in Spain the use of the same calligraphy and this circular element and this bracero. This is not a metal piece like the one we just looked at from Egypt, but rather a ceramic piece. But you can see here they tried really hard to make it look like it was brass, like that real Egyptian, the real stuff from the Middle East. But what becomes interesting here is that the adoption of that border in Islamic, in Arabic calligraphy, used on the halo of this saint in his portrait. So we've seen a cathedral in Italy that has a round circle window like the coupe de Khosrow. And we see here the halo on a saint adopting Middle Eastern calligraphy as an adornment. I think there are a couple of things perhaps at work here. If, as I suggested, the earlier church recognized that Christianity was, of course, not a Western religion, not an outgrowth of the Greco-Roman tradition, but Christianity really is an outgrowth of the Abrahamic tradition, a Middle Eastern tradition. They might have said it is appropriate then for this Christian saint to be connected with this Abrahamic central Middle Eastern thing by using that. That would be if they were a more learned artist. They might, however, have just appreciated, as I did when I first saw Dr. Bazorgi's slide, they just appreciated that it was very beautiful, that it was very graceful, that there was a divine beauty to that calligraphy that was fitting to use on the halo of the saint, just to elevate that individual. The halo, of course, being a symbol of elevation, of divine providence, of divine anointing. the divine calligraphy then being used to emphasize that further. So from 13 to 1600, Italian imitations of Arabic script tend to rely on cursive Arabic rather than Kufic, and therefore should be designated as pseudo-Arabic. The habit of representing gilt halos decorated by pseudo-Kufic script seemed to have disappeared in 1350, but then was revived around 1420 with the work of painters such as Gentile da Fabriano, who was probably responding to the artistic influence in Florence. And interestingly, Florence had negotiated a commercial treaty with the Mamluk Sultan of Egypt, and so the inscriptions may represent an interpretation of the common bond between Christianity and Islam with regard to conversion. Mary, of course, appears in the Quran more than she does in the New Testament. And this becomes sort of a public relations connection between Egypt and Florence. I'm sure we're all aware that another Italian city, Venice, had even more connections with the East in terms of trade. So here is the Adoration of the Magi, close-up of the Virgin Mary here. And once again, in her halo, we have this interesting combination of geometries that sort of recollect that Kuta Khosrow, and then the use of this Arabic script. Once again, I am ignorant as to whether that is Arabic or whether it's pseudo-Arabic. But in either case, the individual who painted this is trying to show the elevated status of this personage by using the Middle Eastern decorative technique. So notice, please, these connections. Here's the palmette that was mentioned earlier, the Greco-Roman kind of thing happening elsewhere in the picture. So important enamel pictures with the official Arabic inscriptions around the rim, like "Glory to our Lord the Sultan," doubled as halos for sacred personages, and there was even a workshop of Muslims in Venice producing versions of Mamluk metalwork tailored to the Italian taste. For centuries, Italy had the largest collection of Islamic art in Europe, a legacy of the thriving late medieval trade with Mamluk Egypt and the acquisitive instincts of the great Italian aristocratic families. This infiltration of Islamic motifs and objects into Western Europe was a lasting side effect of the vigorous trade between East and West. That word infiltration is one that I favor over the one that I think Western European historians tend to talk about influence. I think more than mere influence. I wanted to show you this one. This is a shield that is supposedly from Iran, and it is in the collection of the Navy-Bearer Museum of Art at St. Gregory's University in Shawnee, Oklahoma. All right. Now, unhappily, it was collected by Father Garrett, who was an avid collector, but not such a great historian in terms of finding out all the details of it. So the only details they have is that you got it in Iran, so it's called Persian. But once again, we have the circular element with this central piece that I cannot read. We've got a border of calligraphy here. But I want you to look at the petal shape that's happening here, which differs from the Kuta Khosrow and all those circles, those concentric rings of circles. Here we have this sort of petal design. And since we looked at a Gothic window, a couple of Gothic, one Gothic window earlier, we looked at shops, we can see that perhaps this is represented, is this the beginning of the French rayonnant style of Gothic, with this sort of radiating petal kind of design that we can see. So more, once again, next time we can talk about that. What I was really looking at here was, once again, the use of the calligraphy as an embellishment, as an elaboration, as a border. And here in another painting, another Italian painting from the 1400s, this is the hem of the garment of the Virgin Mary. So once again, the hem is decorated in the highest level of beauty at the time. We use something Islamic that like really elevates this personage. And here are a couple other examples of this. The top one from that earlier painting that we looked at, and then here's another where the hems depict these calligraphic details. Here's a silk from Spain. And what we're looking at here, and I think it's interesting if we sort of squint at this, the emphasis on vertical lines, and then an emphasis similarly on not on curvilinearity happening at the top of those and at the bottom of those lines. Here's a viewer from Afghanistan. I wish this picture were clearer, but I blew it up so big. And what we're seeing here is another idea of, we have some vertical lines happening in the center, and then the decoration on the top and on the bottom of that is curvilinear, cursive calligraphy. Here's an original martini glass, and it's obviously, using all the interesting formats, and then this is a more blocky version of Arabic taking place there. And here we see the use of calligraphy as an architectural ornament in sort of frieze detail. And once again, I ask you to sort of look at the top vertical and like curvilinear activity and dots and things like that happening at the bottom and the top of that line. We're looking at a ceiling detail here, and this is from Isfahan, from the Friday Mosque. I always show these kinds of things to my students, talking about geometry, and say, just draw this. Look, the simple geometries here. Just draw, but you just draw. Get out your T-square and have a good time with that. So this incredible detail that's happening. And here's a piece of a ceramic here. And once again, here we have the beautiful calligraphy with then this adorned background of this amazing sort of swirling thing happening just behind it. And here we have plumage in France. And we see the geometry of the ripple. And in the background, some beautiful foliage kind of background, which is not a Greco-Roman thing, and I submit to you is coming more from that piece of ceramic and that tradition than from an earlier one. I always thought this was interesting. This is the abbot, the later abbot, Jacques D'Amboise, and I believe the ballet dancer, same name. This is after the original, the first Cluny, which of course is some of the earlier pointed arches. That was Abbot Hugh, predecessor here at Cluny. So you wonder, here is that really wonderful kind of foliage kind of pattern. And in French, we call that like the flamboyant style of Gothic. I wonder whether that flamboyant style was it's really coming out of that. Looks a lot like it. Again, in Isfahan, a spectacular mihrab, incredibly decorated here with wonderful calligraphy and borders of every description. And here, much less elaborate room here at St. John College in Cambridge, and the walls here are decorated too, right? What's interesting is development of paneling. Originally, paneling was just boards. They just put boards on the wall, probably originally for insulation purposes. Of course, there were seams between the boards, so after a while, people started making something happen at the seam. They would like lap the boards over to get sort of this wonderful vertical element. And after this sort of board technique came the development of mortise and tenon joints, and that's another paper coming down the pipe, wondering whether the gorgeous artesonado of Spain, the beautiful woodwork of Spain using mortise and tenon, did that move into the rest of Europe? I don't know, that's another paper. But when mortise and tenon came along, suddenly the rails and stiles of the panel and the central flat panel, you could do something with decorating that panel. So originally it was a painted decoration, but as time went by, people developed this, what was in the 19th century first called linenfold. And I want to call your attention to the fact that linenfold, isn't that interesting? It has this sort of like vertical line. And then at the bottom and at the top, it has all these like wavy, curvilinear lines. Now, linenfold just sort of sprung out of nowhere. There was no Greco-Roman basis for linenfold carving whatsoever. Originally, in the 1500s, it was first mentioned, first documented that I could find, and it was merely called lingo-undulatum, so wavy wood. But I think this wavy wood might have been, once again, the ignorant European looking at these beautiful Islamic cursive calligraphy and its use by the Italians to like elevate halos and elevate the hems of garments. We could similarly elevate our paneling by putting some of that calligraphic kind of Islamic-y looking kind of stuff there. It's sort of, I don't know what this means. What does that look like to you? Well, it sort of looks like folded fabric. So let's just interpret that into folded fabric, and that's something that we could hang our hat on. People would recognize. Here's another example of that same linenfold. Here's an Islamic piece of furniture, obviously employing mortise and tenon joints, and using the calligraphy as borders, as we have seen elsewhere, and using the calligraphy in the panels within the piece itself. So there's some inspiration there. And once again, from Spain or Morocco, 1150, we see this carving where we've got vertical lines, this calligraphy. You can imagine how this would have been interpreted later on. A French piece here, notice the linenfold. Particularly notice the very non-Greco-Roman quality of that carving right there. We can look at that much more critically at some Middle Eastern sort of all over kind of patterns. Another one of the examples, right? Draw this. Some complex interlocking kinds of geometries. You'll notice that in this particular carving, we've got an element happening here. A very typical element to happen in this position was a pomegranate, which is like a real English or like French fruit, right? So they're using obviously some of this rare Middle Eastern element as a decoration. Why? Because it was rare, and perhaps I'm suggesting they used these sort of their interpretation of calligraphy to do exactly the same thing with this furniture detail. Here we have one that kind of abandons, this is the latest example of all the furniture I've looked at, abandons the Middle